Good afternoon and good morning to our West Coast listeners, and Happy New Year to all. My name is Juan Thomas, and I'm the chair of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section. And today I am so excited to welcome as my first guest in this new year, my friend and colleague, Mr. Lou Hutt. Lou Hutt is one of the best and most significant CPAs and tax attorneys in the country. He's a leading voice across the country on financial planning issues. And I'm so honored that he is with us today. He's also the author of The Road to Mega Success. And I'm going to promote his book. And if you can't get the third edition, you can have the first edition. I'm sure that's somewhere, like I have. He's on his third edition now, but he'll talk more about that. But I'm so excited to have Mr. Lou Hutt with us today. And he is the CEO of the Hutt Company in Maryland. And Lou, good to see you. Thank you for being my first guest of the new year.
Juan, it's a pleasure to be here. And I'm honored that you selected me and give me an invitation to join you on your matron voyage with your broadcast. Great to be here.
Thank you. And I know this is a bit of a role reversal for you. You're normally the host. You also have a radio show on Sirius XM that airs on Saturday mornings, I believe. And I know I'm a frequent listener. We want to hear more about that as well. But I want to kick off our conversation, Lou, by simply asking you, how should and why is financial planning important, particularly this time of year where most people kind of put together their resolutions or goals for the year? Why is financial planning important for people, particularly lawyers and other professionals?
Well, it's a great question. I mean, I look at it in a nutshell. It's your compass. It's your personal compass. So as you encounter circumstances, situations, requests for funding, you have a sense of what your capability might be. And I always say, Juan, when it comes to financial planning, you should begin with the end in mind. So if the goal after 1 year is to accumulate X number of dollars that we'll use strategically, then I have to start off the year setting some parameters. And let's face it, many of us, we got to worry not only about our professional life, but we've got to do that in our personal lives. Right. Because as we know as lawyers, you may be separate entities from the standpoint of what you do during the day and what you do after 5. But the reality is, as far as the management of your resources and your wealth, without having a plan in place, it's easy to get off track.
That's a very important. I love that sense of it's a compass, a barometer of where you are and where you want to be. Is the approach different based upon if you are a young lawyer or a solo practitioner, if you're in big law or work for the government or nonprofit, or are the principles primarily the same?
Well, and that is a great distinction that you made in terms of a solo or even a lawyer that is partnering with others versus someone who, let's say, knows that they're going to get a regular paycheck every 2 weeks. And where you're in government or you're in corporate, in-house. When you're operating as an independent, whether again it's in association with others or solo, you've got a couple of things that you always have to keep in focus. One is what I call working capital. And working capital in any practice is just a dollar, and let's call it a nest egg, that is there to carry you for somewhere between 60 and 90 days. We know law, as in any other business, revenue can be seasonal. Sometimes revenues can fluctuate. And we don't ever want to get in a situation in which you can't afford to meet your financial obligations as a professional.
Right.
The second thing, of course, is that when you are independent or you practice in association with others, you have to think proactively about taxes. And, you know, the biggest hole that people can fall into from a tax perspective is the failure to make what are known as quarterly estimated tax payments.
That's right.
When you're with an organization, they're doing that hard work for you, usually. But when you're independent, we know, number one, it's a little more difficult to calculate what that number is because your earnings per month, per quarter can fluctuate.
Right.
But you want to be in a position by the end of the year that you paid in about 90% of what is due for that year. So again, two major things that I say to folks is number one, make sure you have a solid working capital to begin your practice with. And number two, be prepared to make quarterly estimated tax payments as you go along.
That's great advice. And you mentioned in your comment the idea that that law is a business, the practice of law.
Yes.
And you and I come from a profession, and many of us who are listening today, we became lawyers because we wanted to serve the community. Yes. Or fight for justice, seek justice, a higher calling. But this is a business. Could you kind of speak more to the business of law and why lawyers should look at themselves not just as advocates or social engineers, to paraphrase Charles Hamilton Houston, but we are business persons, business women, businessmen, particularly those who have their own law practice.
Yes. Well, from that vantage point, I think the safe route to go is to work through a cash flow plan.
Right.
Some might argue, well, that's speculative. I'm estimating. Well, some estimation and forecasting is better than not having any. Now, if we think about it, that's exactly what any kind of business, private sector business, will do. We'll have to look at the segments of, let's call it product divisions. So some will say, hey, I do personal injury, I do estate work, I do a couple of other things. I do business law, I do some tax law. Well, each of those represent a silo that we have to develop now a sub-business plan in terms of how we're going to grow that activity. The other thing, of course, when we talk about growth, and I speak to it in my book, is profitable growth. So sometimes if you're growing on the top line, but your bottom line is shrinking, it's counterproductive. So, it's this balancing piece that we've got to concern ourselves with. We got to be thinking about growth because, as you know, Juan, and I know, when you're in private practice, your paycheck is not guaranteed.
That's right.
And if you're not being strategic in how you're developing new relationships, sometimes it's developing referral sources. Right. Let's face it, it's promotion. All of these things are wrapped up in a growth strategy. And then assuming that the growth strategy pays off, we want to make sure that we manage what's coming in so that the bottom line after taxes is where we need it to be.
That's right. I love what you said. And that kind of leads me to my next question around the importance of lawyers being financially literate and financial literacy.
Yes.
Understanding how money works, understanding how cash flow and taxes work and investing and where to invest. Could you kind of speak to the importance of becoming financially literate as a lawyer and a business person?
Yeah, I think financial literacy is key. It's the equivalent of being able to translate a foreign language. Because most of us didn't grow up, let's face it, talking about stocks, bonds, mutual funds, exchange traded funds. And even in law school, we don't get that type of orientation.
Right.
So the key is for many of us, and this is what your training as a lawyer allows you to do, is it allows you to really dive into a body of information and create a framework for understanding and problem solving. So I look at it much in that way, Juan. I look at it and I say, well, we have to, certain concepts, certain terms, we almost have to force ourselves to come out of the comfort zone to understand. You mentioned cash flow, net income after taxes. We have to sometimes think about risk management, for example, not only lawyers' professional liability insurance, but what other kind of insurances might be appropriate.
Right.
If we're in practice, maybe we need to have life insurance. If we're in practice, we need to have a retirement fund. So we have to understand, just like we would talk about an athlete and we would say for a professional athlete, God forbid if you spend your whole career making and spending money, and after it's over with, you have nothing to show for it.
Right, right.
So
right.
literacy is key, and
Right.
guidance can be very helpful.
Right. Lou, my first boss out of law school told me the challenge of becoming a successful lawyer often is, as you make more money, you will spend more money. I've heard you talk about on your radio show, make more, spend less, I think save or invest the rest, or the difference.
That's right.
Could you speak to that, particularly lawyers who do make significant money, the temptation to spend more, buy the bigger house, buy the bigger, more expensive car, wear fancier clothes? Of course, we want to, live well and enjoy the rewards of our labor, but oftentimes we spend up to our income and
Yes.
get in debt. How do you advise us to resist that as we grow in our profession?
Well, to draw from an adage that I was told many, many years as a child growing up is spend below your means.
Spend below your means.
Below your means. And
Right.
and that's a challenge, because as you point out, Juan, in many cases, just like the athlete,
Yeah.
there's an expectation as a lawyer that you have means, that you are affluent, that you can afford certain things.
Right.
And sometimes what I always encourage people to do is it's not always a question of affordability. It's also a question of creating that nest egg, creating that stash. Sometimes now in the financial industry, they talk about an emergency fund.
Right.
See, we've got to think about all those things. And simple metrics sometimes help. Like I say to folks, well, at least you should not be spending any more than 90% of what you make. You should create, as we talked about a little bit earlier, some parameters.
Right.
Because what we know is, again, when we start talking about finances, is we're battling inflation right now.
Right.
There is the forecast, perhaps, of some recession in this current year. So we have to be prepared to weather those situations. And we know, again, as lawyers, that we're going to have peaks and valleys in terms of our earnings.
Right.
So a lot of this is about navigating what those things that we can predict, we can reasonably predict,
right.
And then also being prepared for the unexpected.
Right. The theme for this year, as under my leadership as chair of the section, is economic justice. And I wanted to ask you to think more philosophically, where does, in your mind, financial planning and financial literacy fall in the concept of economic justice?
Again, I have to commend you on raising such an important issue. When it comes to economic justice, what we know is historically, particularly African Americans and other minorities have paid more in terms of insurance. They paid more to get a mortgage. And part of the reason for that, not that it obviously there's some legacy, some discriminatory legacy and history behind that,
right.
But it's also credit standing. So if one is, let's say, low to moderate income and has challenges from time to time, and those challenges ultimately result in some decrease in their credit score, when they go out and they try to buy a house, when they go out and try to buy a car, when they go to get insurance on their car, they're going to pay a premium.
Right.
And so from an economic justice perspective, we have to look at those things and always search for ways that we can level the playing field. And part of it is through what you're doing right now, which is bringing the message to those who are advisors, right?
Right.
You know, lawyers are often advisors,
Yes.
as well as lawyers leading by example.
Mm.
And sometimes that's meeting with a small group of folk as a community outreach effort, talking about some of these issues and helping them to find solutions. And if not solutions, pairing them up with advisors that can help.
Right. You made reference to the history of discrimination in our country. We are living in very difficult economic times where people are suffering. I think we saw the pandemic kind of reveal some of the underlying challenges that we face as a society around poverty, healthcare. And oftentimes people become very frustrated with the system and ask questions. And so one of my questions to you that has been raised in recent weeks is about the tax code.
Yes.
And most people have never, don't read the tax code. Most lawyers don't read the tax code in detail, except in the context maybe of their business. But people wonder, how does a billionaire avoid paying taxes or pay very minimal taxes? Like we just read, one billionaire paid only $750 in taxes. How does that happen, particularly when people are struggling to make ends meet? And in the terms of economic justice, do you see a need to amend or respond to or fix aspects of the tax code?
Yeah, this is a definitely a self-perpetuating scenario. And for example, we know that home ownership, if you own a home, you're likely to qualify to itemize your income taxes. That means you're going to have a larger return than, say, your neighbor who is renting. Right. So I would love to see some balance in that. That it's not always a requirement to own a home to deduct the cost of your overhead.
Okay. Big
piece. Also, as you mentioned, I mean, these are the whole process of navigating through some of these impediments. Okay, a lot of times folks are struggling with it. They're struggling with it, and for example, we talk about capital gains, capital losses. Well, you have to be a saver to become an investor.
That's right.
And if you can deduct, as you pointed out, if you can have enough resources where you can plow in a ton of cash, a lot of money, and you have access to banks, so you can fund the investment, large investment in real estate. Right. And you're taking deductions based on the cost of that investment from, again, an equity standpoint, that for those people that are in the position to do that are going to fare a lot better in the tax code. Right. So it's really, when we think about capital, it's really very pro risk. It's pro folks who are investors. And the other thing to keep in mind, Juan, is it is pro savers. So we're getting to a point where a new piece of legislation just going to be signed by Congress. I see no reason why it's not. 2.0, the Secure Act 2.0. And it's going to give a wealth of opportunity for savers. But again, if you're struggling to make ends meet, it's hard to take advantage of some of those things. But I think Congress has taken a step forward with this Secure Act 2.0, which should help folks of modest to low income in a lot of areas.
That's very helpful. And I'm going to encourage us to put that in our social media feed to read more about the Secure Act and its implications on our communities. One thing that I hear you say a lot on your show is the need to have a coach.
Yes.
One of my favorite basketball players was named Michael Jordan. He had a coach. lawyers, often we are believed to know everything, right? We're pretty smart. And we may resist the need to have someone advise us.
Yes.
Could you speak to the importance of having a financial advisor or a financial coach? I know you, like I said, you give that advice a lot.
Yes,
On
yes,
your show.
yes. I would say this way, because I'm a strong believer in risk management.
Right.
So without a coach, we're at risk for not knowing what we don't know.
Right.
And that, I think, Juan, is probably the main concern, just as we study as lawyers. And we tend to be somewhat similar to physicians. We develop some core skills and a core area of knowledge. But what we realize is it takes years to not only understand and have a command over that body of information and knowledge, but then to be able to, from a strategic standpoint, manage the nuances.
Right.
Well, when you think about a coach, a financial coach in particular, we think about someone who is studying the market, who's looking at inflation, looking at interest rates, looking at opportunities to invest on a tax efficient basis, calculating what you need to accumulate by way of wealth in order to retire at a certain point.
Right.
How do you need to prepare yourself for your children who will be attending college? See, all of those things coaches can help. And it's difficult when you're managing, you're practicing law, which is all consuming.
Right.
You got a personal life, and you want to obviously work-life balance on that level, right, and then cover all the financial situations and products and invitations and opportunities. It's a little hard and difficult for a person to do. So that's why I think, Juan, coaching, having a coach, having an advisor, even for lawyers, right, who, as you say, we kind of, we're pretty confident about our knowledge, but right, most will admit that finance and tax management is not their strength.
Right, right. And it's good to know what you don't know.
Yes, right? Right. Absolutely.
Right. In addition to having a coach, are there resources or reference materials that you would recommend that lawyers and other people utilize to become more financially literate and understanding how money works and understand how their business works, taxes, credit, savings, investing?
Well, Juan, some years ago, we were joking early in the broadcast about my first edition versus the third edition.
Right.
Well, the first edition, and what inspired me to actually write the book, The Road to Mega Success, Simple Strategies for Enriching the Bottom Line, right, is that I wanted to bring together both a personal and a business financial guide, mm-hmm, so that folks would be able to connect the dots. See, and so that really kind of goes to your point. You look for literature, and obviously, as we all and lawyers understand how we're self-confident, right? Maybe overconfident. But I think a book similar, if not mine, a book similar to that brings together fundamentals. See, because I've realized, even in my practice and the work that I do with individuals, small businesses, law practices, engineering practices, et cetera, it's not really the hieroglyphics that get people in trouble. It's the fundamentals, right? It's the fundamentals. It's when does my lease expire? Does this line of credit come with a renewal option? Where should I park idle money? Right. Frankly, how do I read a balance sheet and an income statement? Well, I've tackled all that in my book, but there's other literature that you can go to. But I just think for lawyers in particular, it's very, very important to get literature that is plain speak, but it covers the fundamentals that are important in order to be successful.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. As we wrap up, could you tell our audience where they can find you? Where can they find your book? And could you speak to the fact that while you advise people to, get a coach, if they would like to talk to you in more detail about their particular financial situation, that you have a national and perhaps even global practice.
Absolutely.
And that many things can be done virtually and are being done virtually, particularly in this climate that we're living in. So how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I appreciate you inviting me to share that information. Real simple, Lou Hutt, LOUHUTT.com. If you go to that website, you'll not only be able to reach me, and there'll be a contact Lou button that you can go to, leave me a message, I'll reach out, but also you can go to that same website for the book. Again, you'll see The Road to Making Success, Simple Strategies for Enriching the Bottom Line. If you grab a copy, I'll send it to you autographed. So that's a great way to connect. Obviously, a third way is thehuttco.com. So that's THEHUTT.com.
Great. Well, Lou, you are a wonderful friend and guest today. You are a master of your craft, and we truly appreciate you sharing our first broadcast for the new year around financial planning. And I just want to thank all of you for listening this afternoon. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your day.